The apartment was wrong before I opened my eyes. I know that sounds impossible, but I knew it the way you know a storm before you check your phone. Something in the pressure, the particular quality of the silence coming through the wall. I lay in bed for a moment with my eyes closed, thinking, she's not here. Not she left early, not she's in the shower. She's not here, and that is a different thing, and it is wrong. It was 6:47 in the morning, a Tuesday. I got up. I walked the 12 steps from my room to hers and stood in the doorway. The bed was made, not slept in and straightened, made. Hospital corners, the kind you do when the making is a message. The desk was clear. The picture she kept beside her lamp, her parents, her younger sister, a beach somewhere that looked like Chennai, was gone. The closet door was open, and inside it, 3 wire hangers turning slowly for no reason, and a pair of shoes she'd decided weren't worth taking. She'd left in the night. She'd been my roommate for 14 months, and she'd left in the night, and she hadn't knocked on my door. On the kitchen table, our kitchen table, the one we'd carried up 3 flights of stairs together the week she moved in, the one that still had the gouge on the left corner from that first morning. There was an envelope with my name on it. Not Wren, my full name. Wren Calloway, in her careful architectural handwriting, like she'd decided this letter deserved the formality of all of me. I stood in the kitchen in my socks, and I looked at that envelope for a long time before I picked it up. Inside was 1 page. The last line said, "I think I loved you first." Her name was Senna Park. She was 26, a UX designer at a firm 3 stops on the train from our apartment. And she had an extremely specific way of loading the dishwasher that she had tried to explain to me twice, and that I had never fully grasped, and that she had eventually, graciously, stopped correcting me on. She liked tea at night and coffee in the morning and a specific brand of dark chocolate she ordered online in boxes of 12 that lived on the second shelf of the pantry. And I knew, without ever having a conversation about it, that the last 2 bars of each box were emergency inventory and not for general consumption. I knew these things the way you know the geometry of a place you've lived. Not because you studied it, but because you absorbed it. Because Senna had become the wallpaper of my daily life. Which sounds like an insult and is not meant as one. She was the constant. She was the background music that you only notice when it stops. She had moved in because my previous roommate had taken a job in Berlin, and my landlord had given me 3 weeks to find someone or lose the apartment. Senna had answered the listing at 11:30 on a Wednesday night, which I noted because my previous roommate had answered at 11:45 on a Wednesday night 4 years earlier. And I had decided, privately and superstitiously, that people who answer rental listings late on weekdays are people with interior lives and no patience for their own insomnia, which is a quality I trust. She came to see the apartment on a Saturday. She asked 3 questions about the water pressure, about the natural light in her room in the morning, and about whether I minded if she worked from home on Fridays. I asked, too, whether she was a loud phone talker and whether she'd ever lived alone before. She had. I hadn't. She took the room. We were considerate from the beginning. I mean that as a description, and also, I understand now, as a diagnosis. The note started, as all the best confessions do, with an apology. I'm sorry for doing it this way. I'm sorry for the early hour and the lack of warning and the fact that you're probably reading this in your socks in the kitchen and I'm probably already on the highway. I thought if I waited for morning, I would lose my nerve. And I have been losing my nerve for approximately 8 months now. So I decided not to give myself the option. 8 months. I read that twice standing at the kitchen table, and then I sat down on the floor. which felt more honest than sitting on a chair. I sat on the kitchen floor with her letter, and I read it from the beginning. The job offer came from a firm in Amsterdam. She'd applied 9 months ago, before the situation, she wrote. Meaning before whatever she was about to explain became the situation. When she was in a different headspace. When Amsterdam was an ambition and not a solution. She hadn't told me because she hadn't expected to get it. She hadn't expected to get it. And then she got it. And by then, it was already complicated in a way she hadn't known how to say out loud. The job started in 3 weeks. She'd accepted 2 weeks ago. She'd been sitting across from me at this table for 14 days, knowing she was leaving, and she'd let me complain about my coworker's parking situation and ask her opinion on whether I should cut my hair and eat her very good red lentil soup, and she had not told me. I need to explain why, she wrote. And I'm sorry in advance, because this is going to change how you think about these 14 months. And I hope it changes them in the right direction. But I can't be there to watch your face when you read it, which is cowardly and also the only way I was able to write this. I turned the page. 8 months ago, I'd been going through something I had described to Senna as a rough patch, with a brevity designed to close the conversation. The rough patch had a name. His name was Marcus, and we had been together for 2 years, and the relationship had ended in the specific way that certain relationships end, not in a single moment, but in a series of smaller moments across several months. Each one a quiet withdrawal of something I hadn't realized I needed until it was gone. By the time it was over, I was a person who had been slowly emptied out over 9 months and was only just standing in the wreckage of it, what I'd allowed. I had told Senna rough patch because it was faster and because I was still deciding how ashamed I was. What I did not know was that she knew. Not the details. I'd been careful about the details. But the shape of it. She could see, the way people who pay attention can see, what was being described by the fact that I came home later and spoke to her less, and seemed, as she wrote it, to be disappearing from the inside out. Which is the kindest way I know to put it. What I did not know was that it had started affecting her months before it ended. She described it carefully. How she'd started paying attention to when I came home, not in a surveillance way, she wrote, but in the way you pay attention to things you're worried about, the way you listen for sounds in the night when something isn't right. How she'd started leaving the kitchen light on. Not all the lights, just the one above the counter, the one that meant the room was occupied and warm and waiting without demanding anything. How she'd learned the specific sound of my key in the lock at 2 in the morning versus 11 at night versus a reasonable hour. And how each one told her something. How she'd started making extra portions of dinner without saying why. Leaving containers in the fridge labeled with the day and a little arrow pointing to the reheating instructions because I had stopped eating actual meals and she had decided, without consulting me, that this was unacceptable. I remembered those containers. I'd thought she was just over-preparing. I'd thought, Senna cooks too much, and this is fine because I benefit from it. I had eaten her food at midnight over the sink for 6 months and told myself it was a convenience. I want to be very honest, she wrote, which means I have to tell you that by month 4 I understood what I was doing and why. And I kept doing it anyway. And I told myself it was just what good roommates do, which I think we both know was not entirely true. I put the letter down on the floor next to me. I picked it up again. She wrote about the night in March. I knew which night immediately. I had come home from what I had thought was going to be a conversation with Marcus, and turned out to be the last conversation with Marcus. And I had come through the front door at 9:30 at night, and I had sat down on the kitchen floor, this floor, the same floor I was sitting on now. And I had not moved for a very long time. I hadn't cried. I was past crying by then. I just sat on the floor like I was waiting for something. Senna had come out of her room 20 minutes later, which she'd told me afterward was because she'd heard the door and then not heard anything else, and the silence had felt wrong. She sat down on the floor next to me. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't say anything. She just sat down and stayed there. And after a few minutes, she got up and came back with 2 mugs of tea and sat down again. And we sat on the kitchen floor drinking tea in silence for an hour and 15 minutes. At some point, she put her head on my shoulder. I had thought, at the time, this is what it means to have a good roommate. I had filed it, genuinely, under I got lucky with this one. I had said thank you when we finally got up, and she had said, you can tell me whenever. And we had gone to our separate rooms, and I had fallen asleep in my clothes. What she wrote now. I sat down on that floor because I was scared for you. I stayed because I couldn't make myself leave. I put my head on your shoulder because I had been wanting to for months, and the floor seemed like the place where normal rules were suspended and I could allow myself something small. I went to my room that night and sat on the edge of my bed and said out loud, to no one, that I was in trouble. I meant it specifically. I meant, I have feelings for my roommate that I have not consented to having, and they are not small feelings, and I have no idea what to do with them. She wrote, I should have told you then. I know that. I have been arguing with myself about that ever since. She wrote, what I told myself instead was that you were healing, that it wasn't fair to add something new and complicated to someone who was still climbing out of something painful, that I could be what you needed, which was someone steady and present and uncomplicated, and that the other thing could just live in me quietly until it became more manageable. She wrote, it did not become more manageable. I need to tell you about November, because the note did not mention November, and November is where I started to understand what I had not understood. November was 4 months into Senna's 8 months of knowing and not saying. By November, I had been out of the Marcus situation for 3 months and had arrived, cautiously, at the beginning of feeling like myself again. I had started cooking again. I had started making plans with friends I'd let go quiet for too long. I had started coming home and meaning it. Coming home because I wanted to be there. Because the apartment had started to feel, again, like a place I chose rather than a place I retreated to. I had started noticing things about Senna that I hadn't let myself notice before, which is its own kind of information. The way she took notes by hand during video calls, even though everyone else used laptops. The way she laughed at her own jokes half a beat before the punchline, which should be annoying and was instead completely disarming. The way she described design problems to me using cooking analogies because she knew it was the only metaphor system I would reliably track. The way she'd said once, almost to herself, while we were watching a documentary about migratory birds, I think the brave thing and the scared thing are often the exact same action. I had written that down. I had not told her I'd written it down. In November, I had asked her if she wanted to get dinner, not at home, not delivery, outside, a restaurant, the two of us, which we had done in 14 months, exactly never. She'd said yes before I'd finished the sentence. We went to a Vietnamese place 3 blocks away that we'd walked past 100 times and never entered. We talked for 3 hours. We walked home slowly through cold air and stood on the front steps for another 20 minutes, even though we were both chilled through. And I'd thought, I don't want to go inside yet. And I hadn't said that. And we'd gone inside. She wrote about November. She called it the dinner, like there was only one. After the dinner, she wrote, I applied for the Amsterdam job. Not because I wanted to leave. because I needed to understand whether I was staying for the right reasons. I needed to force myself to imagine leaving, to see if I could, to see if it felt like freedom or loss. It felt like loss before I'd even written the cover letter. I applied anyway, because that felt like information I needed to have. And I was afraid of what I would do with it if I stayed. She'd been offered the job 6 weeks later. She'd taken 2 more weeks to accept it. She had been sitting with the acceptance for 2 weeks when she left. "I have been trying for 8 months," she wrote, "to be what you needed without asking for what I needed. I have been trying to find a version of staying that didn't require me to tell you, because telling you risked the thing I valued most, which was you. I did not find that version. I found Amsterdam instead. Which is not the solution I would have chosen, but I am not sure I was capable of choosing." And then the last lines. "I want you to know that the 14 months we lived together were the realest of my adult life. I want you to know that the kitchen light was always on because I wanted you to come home to something warm. I want you to know that the containers in the fridge were never about the food. I want you to know that I am telling you this from a safe distance, because it is the coward's choice and also the only one I had left. I think I loved you first. I think I loved you before you were even looking. I thought you should know that, even if all it ever is something you know." Senna. I sat on the kitchen floor for a long time. Then I did what I should have done 8 months earlier, and 14 months earlier, and every November evening in between. I called her. She picked up on the second ring, which means she was waiting for it, which means she had left herself that much hope. I heard traffic, highway noise. She was already far. I said, "Turn around." She said, "Ren," I said, "I'm not asking you to cancel Amsterdam. I'm not asking you to change the plan. I'm asking you to come back for 1 hour so I can say this to your face instead of into a phone because you deserve that, and so do I." She was quiet for a long time. She said, "Say what?" I said, "That I wrote down something you said in November, and I have looked at it 7 times since. And I did not let myself understand why until approximately 9 minutes ago when I was sitting on our kitchen floor reading your letter." Another long silence. Longer. She said, "What did I say?" I said, "That the brave thing and the scared thing are often the exact same action." I heard her exhale, the specific sound of a person who has been holding their breath for 8 months. She said, "I'm 40 minutes out." I said, "I'll have tea ready." She came back. Not permanently, not that morning. Amsterdam was real, and the job was real, and 3 weeks later she was on a plane, and that was real too. What happened in the 40 minutes she drove back and the 3 hours we sat at that kitchen table is not something I'll put into the wrong words by summarizing it here. What I will say is that it was the most honest conversation I have ever had in my adult life. And it lasted until the sun was high and the tea was cold, and we were both laughing about something that had started as crying. She went to Amsterdam. I went to Amsterdam 4 months later, long weekend. Ostensibly tourism, not at all ostensibly tourism. We have had more honest conversations in the last year than in 14 months of sharing walls and kitchen lights and a table with a gouge in the left corner. The table is still there, by the way. I didn't replace it. Didn't seem right. She sent me a box last month. Inside, 2 bars of dark chocolate from the emergency inventory shelf. There was a note that said, "These were always for you anyway." What Senna's letter gave me wasn't a love story. It was a mirror. Because I had stood in the kitchen and eaten her midnight food, and sat with her on the floor, and walked home slowly through cold air, and I had felt, and I had filed it all under I got lucky with this one and moved on. Not because I didn't know. Because knowing required something I wasn't sure I had. Because some feelings are easier to not name than to name and discover they don't go both ways. And the not naming costs nothing until one morning you're standing in the kitchen in your socks reading a letter from someone who got in a car rather than knock on your door. She was braver than me. She wrote the letter. She got in the car. And still, she almost made it to Amsterdam. The knock matters. The call matters. The one moment where you say turn around instead of letting the highway noise fill the silence and telling yourself it was probably for the best. There is a version of this story where I don't make that call. I've thought about it more times than is probably healthy. In that version, she lands in Amsterdam, and I read the letter 7 more times and eventually put it in a drawer and go through some process of understanding something I can't quite name. And the apartment stays quiet, and the kitchen light I start leaving on for no clear reason becomes just a habit. And years later, I am at a table with someone I love, and I say, "There was this roommate once," and the sentence doesn't have an ending I know how to say out loud. The knock matters. The call matters. That is the whole lesson. And I didn't learn it until I was sitting on a kitchen floor at 6:47 in the morning, reading the words, "I think I loved you first and finally." Finally understanding that love that goes unspoken is not patient and quiet. It is a person driving toward the highway, hoping someone stops them. There is someone in your life right now who has said something once, lightly, and watched your face to see if you understood, and you probably didn't. And they probably said anyway and changed the subject. And it has lived in both of you ever since, like a word in a language neither of you has admitted you speak. Have you ever almost let someone go? Not because you didn't feel it, but because you were waiting to be sure. And by the time you were sure, they were already gone? What did you do? What do you wish you had? Subscribe. These are the stories that don't resolve themselves.